It's crazy how quickly things can go wrong, isn't it? One minute, you're cruising down a road you've driven 1,000 times before, and the next, you're wondering if you're ever going to see the light of day again. This happened to me. It wasn't some crazy storm or reckless driver. No, it was something much darker. Something I should have known better than to mess with. It was late. Way later than I planned, actually. I'd been out visiting a friend in the next town over, and the drive home was never supposed to be this late. But when you've been chatting with someone for hours and the time slips away, you find yourself in the situation I did that night, on a lonely road with nothing but the headlights of my car cutting through the darkness. I've driven that road 100 times, maybe more. It's a shortcut, the kind of road you take when you want to save time, not realizing that it might cost you everything instead. There's a stretch of it, maybe a mile or two, that's got a bit of a reputation. People talk about it, you know. Whisper things about strange noises or odd figures that appear in the trees if you're driving by at the right or wrong time. Most of the time, I'd roll my eyes and laugh it off, but that night was different. I didn't even think about it when I turned onto the road. There was nothing remarkable about the night, the road, or even the way the fog began to roll in. It was just a drive home, nothing more. But I had this feeling, this nagging feeling, like someone was watching me. I know, it sounds ridiculous. It's easy to get in your head when it's late and everything's quiet, but I couldn't shake it. The headlights bounced off the wet asphalt, the rain having passed hours before. The air was thick, and the trees on either side of the road loomed like silent watchers. I sped up a bit, telling myself it was nothing, just the tiredness setting in. But then the road, it felt off, like the curves were too sharp, the turns too sudden. I tried to brush it off, but when the shadows around me started to shift, just slightly, but enough to make me feel uneasy, I couldn't ignore it any longer. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. That's when I saw it. A figure, not a person really, but something that moved along the side of the road. It was too tall, too thin, and it didn't move like any living thing I'd ever seen. It swayed with this unnatural fluidity, like it was gliding, not walking. My heart skipped a beat. I slammed on the brakes. The tires screeched, but when I looked out the window, the figure was gone. I couldn't even tell if it had ever been there, but the air around me felt different, heavier, like the darkness was pressing in, and I was the only thing standing between it and total silence. I was about to pull over, to maybe gather myself, but something kept me on the road. Maybe it was the desire to get home, or maybe it was fear. Fear that if I stopped, I wouldn't be able to start again. And then, just when I thought the worst was over, my headlights flickered, once, twice, and then went out completely, dead, just like that. For a split second, everything was pitch black. No moon, no stars, just nothing. I fumbled for the flashlight on my phone, trying to make sense of what was happening. But as I held it up, I swear I heard something. A scraping noise. The kind of noise you hear when something's dragging along the ground. I shone the light out the window, scanning the darkness. Nothing. Then, just as quickly as it had gone out, the headlights came back on. But when they did, the road was different. It wasn't the same road anymore. I couldn't explain it, but everything looked wrong. The trees were twisted, their branches curling in impossible directions. The road was cracked, like it hadn't been maintained in decades, and there was this smell, this stench, like wet earth and something decaying. I wanted to turn around. I should have turned around, but I didn't. And that, my friend, was the biggest mistake I ever made. I don't know what kept me driving. Maybe it was the adrenaline, or maybe it was just the stubborn refusal to believe that something was actually wrong. I mean, come on, I had to be imagining things, right? There was no way that the road was changing, no way the trees were twisting in on themselves. And yet, there I was, barreling down that cursed stretch of road, my knuckles white from gripping the steering wheel, my breath coming in shallow, nervous gasps. The air felt heavy, too, like it was pressing in on me from all sides, suffocating. I rolled down the windows, desperate for some fresh air, but all I got was the scent of rotting leaves and damp earth. Strange, but not exactly unnatural for a lonely stretch of woods. Still, there was something about it, something that made the hairs on my arms stand up. And then I heard it, a sound, distant at first, like someone whispering from far away. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. It was almost like someone calling my name, but I couldn't catch the words. The voice was muffled, layered beneath the sound of my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. It was coming from somewhere to my left, deep in the woods, just beyond the reach of my headlights. I gripped the wheel tighter, eyes darting to the rearview mirror. There was nothing behind me, nothing ahead of me either, except the winding road and the oppressive darkness. The whispering came again, this time clearer. "Stop!" It wasn't a voice I recognized. It didn't sound like a person at all, more like 1,000 voices layered over one another, hissing, pleading, chanting. The sound grew louder, more insistent. I slammed my foot on the brake. The car skidded, tires screeching as I jerked to a stop, my heart pounding in my chest. The road in front of me was silent, almost too silent. The trees on both sides of the car were still, unnaturally still. No wind, no rustling leaves, just that same thick, suffocating air. My hands were trembling now, my fingers so tight around the wheel that they hurt. My phone was still in my lap, its weak light casting shadows across the seat, but I couldn't bring myself to touch it. Something told me I didn't want to see what was out there. I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was the fear that something was following me, or maybe it was the stupid, stubborn hope that if I kept going, I'd make it out of there unscathed. But I put the car back in gear, pressing the gas slowly, trying to ease forward. That's when I saw it, a figure, just ahead. At first I thought it was a person, a hitchhiker maybe, standing in the middle of the road, but as I got closer, I realized it wasn't human. It was tall, way too tall, and the way it stood there, completely still, gave me an overwhelming sense of dread. The figure's limbs were long and twisted, almost like they were broken, bent in ways that no human body should ever move. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and its eyes, if you could even call them that, were just hollow, dark pits. My foot slammed on the brake again, and the car lurched to a stop, the engine sputtering. As I stared at the thing in front of me, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was someone in a costume. Maybe it was some kind of twisted prank. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't explain how the figure just stood there, perfectly still, staring at me with those hollow eyes. The whispering started again. "Stop!" The voice wasn't coming from the figure, but from all around me. It was as if the trees themselves were speaking to me, urging me to stop, to turn around. But I couldn't. I was frozen in place, my body refusing to move, my mind a whirl of panic and confusion. "Please!" The word was softer now, almost pleading, like it was a whisper meant for only me. The figure took a step forward, and I saw its limbs bend unnaturally, like they were stretching and snapping at the same time. Its movement was so fluid, so wrong, that it made my stomach churn. That's when I heard something else, a soft tapping, coming from inside the car. I whipped my head to the side, my heart in my throat, my breath catching in my chest. It was as if someone was tapping on the window, but when I looked, no one was there. Just the dark, endless night pressing in on me, suffocating me with its cold embrace. Tap, 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 faster now, louder. The tapping turned into banging, like fists slamming against the glass. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to get out of there. Without thinking, I threw the car in reverse and slammed the gas pedal to the floor. The tires screeched, and I jerked backward, my heart pounding in my ears. I didn't care where I was going. I just needed to get away from that thing, from whatever it was that was hunting me. I glanced in the rearview mirror as I sped away. The figure was gone. The road behind me was empty, but the air was still thick, the tension still hanging in the air like a heavy fog. I don't know how long I drove after that. It felt like hours, but I couldn't seem to escape the feeling that something was following me, watching me from the shadows. Every time I looked in the mirror, I thought I saw something moving just out of the corner of my eye, and then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the road ahead of me changed again. The trees thinned out, the oppressive darkness lifting as I drove into the light of the street lamps. The world felt normal again, like nothing had happened. But I knew better. I wasn't out of the woods yet. Not by a long shot. I kept driving, my grip still tight on the wheel, eyes darting nervously between the road ahead and the rearview mirror. The further I went, the more the eerie sensation of being watched refused to fade. My pulse raced. I felt like I was being pursued by something unseen, something that wasn't human, not anymore. The road had become normal again. The trees weren't twisted, the fog wasn't suffocating, and the air, while still cold, didn't carry that rot-like stench. Everything seemed so ordinary now, almost too ordinary, as if the road had been a dream, a nightmare that I had imagined. But I knew better. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still in its grip. I turned the corner, and that's when I saw it. A sign. It was weathered, old, and barely legible in the dim light. But there it was, standing at the edge of the road. I almost missed it, but something made me look, and when I did, my blood ran cold. Welcome to Hollow's Edge. Hollow's Edge. I had never heard of it. No town by that name, no landmark, and yet it felt familiar in a way that made my skin crawl. I could have sworn that sign hadn't been there just moments ago, that it had just appeared out of thin air. I slowed down, trying to process what I was seeing, when my headlights flickered again, casting brief shadows across the landscape. The trees seemed to lean in closer, as if drawn by some invisible force, their branches reaching out like fingers, and then, from the woods, movement. At first I thought it was another person, someone standing in the trees watching me, but this wasn't a person. It wasn't even human. There was something there, a shape, tall, dark, and somehow too wide, too angular to be natural. It stood just inside the tree line, its form barely visible in the darkness, but its presence unmistakable. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream. I wanted to speed up, but my foot felt glued to the brake. My eyes were locked on the figure, frozen with terror, and then it stepped forward. It wasn't walking, not really. It just shifted, like it was sliding through the air, its body bending in ways that made no sense. The closer it got, the more I realized just how wrong it was. Its face, or what passed for a face, was featureless, a mass of writhing shadows, and in the darkness I thought I saw eyes, two dark pits that seemed to reflect the headlights in ways that no living thing could. My breath hitched. I couldn't stop myself anymore. I pressed down on the gas, the engine roaring to life as I jerked the car forward. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I needed to get away. I didn't care about speed limits, didn't care about the turns. I just needed to move. The car lurched down the road, tires spinning in the wet earth. But when I glanced back in the rearview mirror, the thing was still there. It wasn't chasing me, though. It wasn't running or moving at all. It was just waiting, watching. I slammed my foot to the accelerator. The engine growled as I sped faster, my heart hammering in my chest. But the faster I went, the more the road seemed to stretch out in front of me. The trees were blurring by, the darkness swallowing the world around me, until there was nothing but the road, the car, and the suffocating sense that I wasn't alone. I glanced back again. This time, the figure was closer, not in the trees anymore. It was standing in the middle of the road. I swerved. The car screeched as I fought to regain control, but the thing didn't even flinch. It stood there, its head tilting at an impossible angle, its eyes, those empty, hollow eyes, focused directly on me, the road, the car, the world around me. Everything felt like it was slipping away, like I wasn't in control anymore. "Stop!" The whisper came again, that same voice layered with 1,000 others, soft and insistent. Stop! I didn't. I couldn't. I slammed the wheel to the side, narrowly avoiding the thing, my tires tearing through the dirt as I sped off the road, crashing into the underbrush. The car jolted and bucked as I fought to steer it back onto the pavement, my hands shaking so violently that I could barely keep hold of the wheel. And then, just like that, silence. I stopped the car, the engine idling in the stillness. My breath came in ragged gasps, sweat pouring down my face, my heart pounding so loud I thought it might burst from my chest. I sat there, motionless, my eyes scanning the road ahead, the woods to my left. There was no sign of the figure, no sign of anything, just the quiet hum of the engine, the distant rustling of leaves in the wind. But I knew it wasn't over, not by a long shot. I didn't know how much time passed, but the feeling of dread never left. The silence was oppressive, almost as if the world was holding its breath. I didn't want to move. I didn't want to look, but I had to. The headlights flickered again, casting strange, warped shadows across the road, and when they finally stabilized, I saw it, the sign. Hollow's Edge. It was right in front of me now. It hadn't been there before, but it was there now, its weathered surface almost glowing in the dim light. I realized then what was wrong. This road, it wasn't leading anywhere. It wasn't taking me home. It was taking me somewhere else. Somewhere other. Somewhere I couldn't escape. The engine sputtered, and I slammed the gas pedal down again. I didn't look back. I didn't care. I just kept driving, faster and faster, hoping that the faster I went, the more I could outrun whatever was waiting for me. But it was always there, always watching, always waiting. The road stretched endlessly before me, a never-ending ribbon of black asphalt, slick with moisture, and framed by trees that now felt like twisted sentinels. Their branches arched overhead, casting strange, malformed shadows across the windshield. It was as if they were reaching for me, eager to pull me into their depths. The sign, Hollow's Edge, kept appearing, as if mocking me, reminding me that I was trapped in this nightmare. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Every instinct screamed at me to keep my eyes on the road, to stay focused, but the darkness in the periphery was inescapable. The trees felt alive, watching, listening, and I swore I could hear them whispering, low and insistent. I pushed the gas pedal harder, feeling the car surge forward. But no matter how fast I went, the road refused to end. It stretched and twisted, always just out of reach, always bending and curving in ways that made no sense. It was like the road itself was alive and aware. My eyes flicked back to the rearview mirror. I couldn't help it. I had to know. But this time, there was something else there, something worse. It wasn't just the figure anymore. It was an entire mass of darkness swirling behind me, moving with an unnatural speed. The headlights of my car barely pierced the blackness, and the road was becoming a blur. Something was chasing me. I could feel it. It was closer now. I could almost hear its breath, a wet rasping sound that made my stomach churn. I knew what it was, whatever it was, and I didn't want to know. I didn't want to acknowledge it. But the air around me grew thick, suffocating, and I felt something cold brush against my skin, like invisible fingers reaching through the air, touching me, pulling me deeper into the darkness. I pushed the pedal to the floor, the engine screaming as the car lurched forward. The speedometer was climbing higher than it should have been, but I didn't care. All I cared about was getting away from that thing. I stole another glance at the mirror, and I saw it. Just a glimpse, just a shadow moving too quickly to comprehend. But I saw the outline of something. No, someone, riding in the back seat. There was no face, just the outline of a figure, a silhouette with limbs too long, too distorted to be human. It wasn't sitting. It was crouched, like some animal ready to pounce. I gasped, my heart leaping into my throat. I jerked my head to the side, staring straight ahead, but I could feel the weight of those hollow eyes on me. The car jerked violently, the tires squealing as I swerved sharply to the left. My hands gripped the wheel like they might break off, but I couldn't let go. It's not real. It's not real. The thought repeated over and over in my mind, but I knew it wasn't true. I knew what I was seeing. I knew what was happening. The back seat was empty now, but that didn't comfort me. I didn't want to look back again, but I had to. The mirror beckoned me like a twisted siren song. My eyes unwillingly traveled to it, and I saw something that made my blood run cold. The back seat wasn't empty anymore. There, sitting where I'd left it, was a person. No, a thing. It wasn't a person. It couldn't be. Its face was a blank canvas, pale and stretched. Its eyes black pits of nothing. The thing's mouth open, impossibly wide, and I heard it speak. Stop. Stop driving. It wasn't a voice. Not really. It was more like a sound that existed outside of the physical world, like a hum in the air that shook the very core of my being. I could feel it in my bones, in my soul. I slammed my foot on the brake, but the car didn't stop. It wouldn't stop. The engine roared. The wheels screamed in protest, but the road never ended. The thing in the back seat leaned closer. I could feel it now, just inches from my neck, its cold breath against my skin. It spoke again, only this time the words were clearer. You're never leaving. The voice was wrong. The way it echoed in my ears, bouncing off the walls of my skull, made my head ache. I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. It was too much. But then, in the distance, I saw something. A light. A flicker in the far-off trees, barely visible through the thick fog. It looked like headlights. Maybe another car, someone else on this damn road. Someone who could help me. I sped toward the light, pushing the car faster than I ever thought it could go. The speedometer spun wildly, the numbers blurring. The light grew brighter, and I thought, no, I knew that I was going to make it out. I was going to escape. But when I reached it, when I got close enough to see it clearly, I slammed the brakes again, heart sinking into my stomach. There was no car. The light, it wasn't headlights. It was a reflection. It was my own headlights. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what stood in front of them. It was the figure again. The same one. The same twisted, impossibly tall creature. It wasn't moving. It wasn't even alive, not in the way I understood life. It stood, waiting, eyes empty and unblinking. I tried to reverse. My hands shook uncontrollably, fumbling for the gear shift. But no matter how hard I tried, the car wouldn't budge. The figure took a slow step forward, then another. Each step felt like it was breaking the air around me, like the space between us was collapsing, folding in on itself. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. And then the thing reached out, its fingers stretching impossibly long, wrapping around the side of the car, touching the window. The air around me froze. It spoke, its voice low and guttural. I told you. You're never leaving. The window cracked. I screamed. The world went black. I don't know how long I was out. Time didn't seem to exist anymore. It could have been minutes, hours, or days. The only thing I could remember was the darkness, thick, suffocating, and all-encompassing. I woke up to the sound of rain. The pitter-patter of it against the windshield was the first thing I registered, followed by the familiar, stifling silence. I wasn't sure if I had died, if I was still on the road, or if I was stuck in some kind of limbo. My head felt like it was split open. my body bruised and sore, as if I had been dragged through some hellscape. I didn't open my eyes immediately. I couldn't. My mind refused to let me face whatever I had seen last. That thing, the thing that had been in the back seat, the one with its empty eyes and that voice, it wasn't gone. It couldn't be. But when I finally opened my eyes, I was still here, still on the road, still driving. I let out a shaky breath, trying to steady myself. My hands gripped the steering wheel once more, trembling, but the car was no longer moving forward. It wasn't just the rain. There was something else, something worse. The car was stuck. Not on the road, not on anything I could physically see, but trapped, frozen as if the very air around me had solidified. I tried to shift the car into gear again, but the engine sputtered, refusing to respond. The headlights flickered, casting long, warped shadows across the road. There was a mist now, thick and swirling, creeping in from the trees like a living thing, coiling around the car, blotting out everything beyond the window. I couldn't stay here. I opened the door, my breath quickening. I had to move to get out of this car before something worse happened, but as soon as I stepped outside, my feet sank into the soft, wet earth. The road was gone. The car was gone. I was standing on a patch of dirt surrounded by an infinite expanse of dark trees all twisted and gnarled like ancient sentinels. The sky above me was black, as if night had swallowed the sun, and the air, it tasted wrong, cold, thick, and the ground beneath my feet felt like it was alive, pulsing. I turned in a circle, frantic, eyes darting around, searching for something, anything that could tell me what was happening. The figure. I knew it was near. I could feel its presence again, lurking, watching, waiting. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as a desert. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. That's when I saw it, a shape, barely visible, just a shadow among the trees. At first, I thought it was just another trick of the mind, something my brain was conjuring up to torment me. But then it moved. Slowly, deliberately, coming toward me. I froze. The figure emerged from the trees, towering over me, its long, crooked limbs swinging unnaturally. Its face, or what should have been a face, was still a mask of darkness, hollow, vacant. But this time, there was something new. A sound, a low hum, almost like a song, distant but growing louder. It was coming from the figure itself, vibrating the air around me, a deep, unsettling frequency that made my chest feel tight. I couldn't breathe. The air was thick with it, pressing in from all sides. I stumbled backward, my body moving before my brain could process it. But no matter how far I backed up, the figure kept coming. It didn't move quickly. It didn't need to. It was always just there, closing the distance with every step. And then it spoke. You shouldn't have come here. The voice was even more unsettling up close. It wasn't just one voice, it was hundreds, thousands maybe. A chorus of whispers, all layered over one another, distorting the words, twisting them into something incomprehensible. My legs felt weak, my knees buckling beneath me. I couldn't look away from the thing. I couldn't see their eyes. They were hidden behind the darkness. But I could feel them, watching me, waiting for me to take a step closer. You shouldn't have come. The voice was soft, barely a whisper, but it felt like it was vibrating through my chest, shaking my bones. I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. All I could do was stand there, frozen in place, staring at the figure in the doorway. You've crossed the line. The air seemed to grow colder, the fog swirling around me, pressing in closer, and then, before I could react, the figure raised its hand, pointing directly at me. Now you're trapped. The ground beneath my feet shifted again, but this time it didn't just dissolve. It pulled me toward the doorway, as if it had become a magnet, dragging me closer. I struggled, tried to fight it, but my legs wouldn't obey. It was like I was being sucked into the void, each step I took toward the figure pulling me deeper into whatever hell I had wandered into. Then, in a flash, I remembered. The road, the signs, Hollow's Edge. I had been warned, again and again. The voices had tried to tell me to turn back, but I hadn't listened. I had kept driving, kept moving forward, convinced that it was just another bad stretch of road, a nightmare I could escape from. But I was wrong, so wrong. I wasn't supposed to be here, none of us were. The figure in the doorway stepped aside, revealing the darkness beyond, a place that seemed to stretch on forever, a void that consumed everything. I could feel its pull, its weight, dragging at my very soul. The figure reached out, its hand cold and skeletal, its fingers wrapping around my wrist. "No one leaves Hollow's Edge," it whispered. "Not alive, not ever." I tried to scream, tried to pull away, but its grip tightened. And in that moment, I realized the terrible truth. The road wasn't haunted by ghosts, or demons, or any creature I had imagined. It was cursed. Cursed to trap souls, to pull anyone who wandered onto it into an endless cycle of torment until they too became part of the prison. And I had become its latest victim. The darkness engulfed me. The fog, the cold, the silence, it all swallowed me whole. There was no escape, no light, no hope. But as the figure's hand tightened around my wrist, something shifted. Something deep within me broke through the fear, through the suffocating grip of despair. I wasn't done yet. I wasn't going to let it take me. And so, I fought. With every ounce of strength I had left, I broke free, pulling away from the figure. I didn't know how, but I did. I turned, ran, my feet slamming against the ground as I sprinted toward the doorway, toward the light. But the light, it wasn't salvation. It was a trap. I didn't stop. I couldn't. But as I crossed the threshold, everything shifted. The world around me warped again, the landscape bending, twisting in on itself, and suddenly I was back on the road. But it was different. It wasn't just the same road. It was worse. The trees were closer, the fog thicker. The sign, Hollow's Edge, loomed ominously in front of me, as if mocking me for thinking I had escaped. I was back, and I had no idea how to get out. The road had always been there. It wasn't just a place on a map. It wasn't just a stretch of black asphalt winding its way through the forest. Hollow's Edge had been created for a purpose that had nothing to do with convenience or travel. It had been forged with blood. I remembered that now. For the first time, the whispers in the wind became clear. The voices that had been calling to me, warning me to turn back, they were speaking to me from beyond the veil of the living, from the depths of a curse that had started long before my own car had ever hit that blackened stretch of road. It was the trees. They were the keepers of the curse. Hollow's Edge was the barrier, the boundary between the world of the living and something far older, something more sinister. The forest was once alive with villagers. The road had been built long ago through the heart of a forgotten settlement, one that had existed before any modern road or town. The villagers were trapped as I had been by the pull of a malevolent force, a presence that had no face, no name, but whose hunger could never be satisfied. The villagers had tried to escape, but they were always brought back, lured into the road, their souls devoured by the very trees they had lived among. The trees themselves, the very forest, had grown from their spirits. Their agony fed the curse, feeding the thing that lived beneath the earth, beneath the roots, in the heart of Hollow's Edge. The road had been built to bind them. The trees had been planted to hold them in place. It was a place of eternal torment, where souls who walked onto the road would never leave, trapped by the cursed land, trapped by the hunger of the forest itself. As I stumbled forward, the air growing colder and the fog thicker, I began to understand the significance of the figure I had seen, the one that looked like me. It wasn't just a shadow, It wasn't just a doppelganger, it was the manifestation of a soul that had once tried to escape, someone who had once thought they could break free from the road, only to be trapped again, their essence distorted, torn from them and rewritten into something that lived in the depths of the curse. That figure was a warning, and now it was me. The horror of it hit me then, the terrifying realization that I wasn't just a victim of a haunted road, I was becoming part of it. The road didn't just trap your body, it consumed your soul, twisted it into something else entirely. The very nature of the curse was to pull you into the road's unending cycle, to take you, break you, and then remake you into a new shade of the torment that filled the trees. I staggered, my feet heavy with the weight of what I had learned, but my mind couldn't rest. I couldn't stay still, not when I knew the truth, not when I knew what was waiting for me, the trees, the road. They weren't just a prison, they were feeding. The figure in the doorway had tried to warn me, the voices had tried to warn me, but now there was no turning back. The forest stretched endlessly, a labyrinth of cursed land, each path leading deeper into the heart of the curse. The road was its lifeblood, the trees were its sentinels, and I had already crossed the threshold. In the distance I heard it again, the hum, low, vibrating through the ground, through my bones, reaching into the depths of my mind. It was calling to me. And this time I couldn't escape. The hum grew louder, vibrating through the ground beneath my feet. It was as if the road, the trees, the very earth itself was alive, pulsing with a dark, insidious energy that threatened to tear me apart. The fog thickened, swirling like an unstoppable force, suffocating me with each breath. I couldn't run. I couldn't fight it. I had been foolish to think that escaping was possible. Escape wasn't an option. And now I understood what the curse truly was. Hollow's Edge didn't just trap you, it consumed you, body and soul, until you were nothing but a part of the forest itself. The road would twist your essence into something unrecognizable, until you were just another shadow, another forgotten whisper in the wind. I had already become a part of it, hadn't I? My soul was already intertwined with the trees, feeding the hunger of the land, twisting with the forces I could barely comprehend. I took a few shaky steps forward, the fog now choking me, thick and suffocating. The trees loomed on either side, their gnarled branches reaching toward me like skeletal hands. I could hear their whispers now, faint at first, then growing louder, the voices of the lost, the souls of the ones who had walked this road before me. "You'll never leave," they whispered. "You'll never escape." I fell to my knees, my heart racing, my chest tight. The weight of the knowledge, the truth, was too much. There was no escaping Hollow's Edge. No one left. We were all trapped in this unending nightmare. I felt the cold hand of the figure on my shoulder, cold as ice, the touch sending a jolt of terror through my veins. It was the version of myself, the one who had tried to escape, the one I was becoming. "It's too late," it whispered, its voice like a dead echo. "We are all part of the curse now. The road is our home, our prison." I felt the power of the curse surge through me, its hunger pulling at my soul. It was as if the road itself was reaching into me, pulling me closer to its core, to the heart of Hollow's Edge. The trees trembled, their branches swaying as if in anticipation. Suddenly something shifted. The figure that had been walking toward me, the version of myself, the twisted reflection, paused. It stared at me with those hollow eyes, and for the first time I realized something horrifying. It wasn't me. Not at all. I hadn't been brought here. I had been here all along. This road wasn't just a trap. It wasn't just some cursed land. It was a cycle, a loop, and I wasn't just a victim. I was the cause. I was the one who had created it. I had driven down the road years ago seeking something, answers, peace, but in my search I had become something else, something far worse. I had made a choice and I had unknowingly triggered the curse that trapped me and countless others in this endless nightmare. I had been here before. I had been the one who had built the road, laid down the foundations, etched the curse into the land with my own hands. The truth struck me like a punch to the gut. I wasn't escaping. I was returning, over and over again, like the others who had walked the road before me. And now, it was too late. The trees shifted again, and the ground trembled as I felt the pulse of the curse surge around me. There was no escaping it. But there was something I could do. I looked up at the figure, the reflection of myself, the twisted version that had once been me, who had been pulled into this cycle. I wasn't trapped anymore. I understood the truth now. I could end it. I had the power to break the cycle, but it would cost me everything. With trembling hands I reached into the air, feeling the oppressive force around me. The fog, the trees, the earth. I could feel it all now, the curse, the power it held over me. It wasn't just the land that was haunted. It was me. I whispered the words, the same words I had spoken long ago when I first created Hollow's Edge. I release you. The world around me trembled. The trees groaned, their branches shaking violently as if in pain. The ground cracked, the earth splitting open, swallowing everything in its wake. And in that moment, the curse was broken. The road collapsed, and with it, everything. The trees, the fog, the endless loop of Hollow's Edge. They all disappeared in an instant, consumed by the force I had summoned. But as the world around me dissolved into darkness, I realized the horrifying truth. I wasn't free. I had never been free. And as I felt the weight of the curse pull at me, I heard the last whisper, my own voice, echoing through the abyss. I am the road! As the last echoes of the forest's groans faded into nothing, I stood in the void, the remnants of a Hollow's Edge evaporating around me. The ground had split wide open, the fog had dispersed, and the trees, once towering and malevolent, had vanished, leaving nothing but an empty emptiness stretching on forever. I had broken the cycle. The curse was gone, shattered like glass, or so I thought. I reached out into the darkness, my hands trembling, my mind swimming in a fog of confusion. There was no road beneath my feet, no trees to cast their looming shadows over me. Just silence, stillness, a kind of empty peace I had never known, as though the very air was holding its breath. But then, a voice, a whisper, soft at first, then louder, familiar, almost too familiar. You can't escape. It was mine. I spun around, but there was no one there. Just endless nothing. No walls, no sky. Just a void that stretched in all directions as far as I could see. You can't escape me. And there it was again. My voice. I froze, the truth slamming into me like a punch to the gut. The curse hadn't been broken. It hadn't been destroyed. It had merely been transferred. I had fought, struggled, and sacrificed. But in the end, I had become the curse. I was the road, the darkness, the endless loop. The thing that had once trapped me was now part of me, and no matter how hard I tried to escape it, I would always be tied to it. I was Hollow's Edge. The ground beneath me began to crack once more. The fog began to swirl, faint and creeping, at first like a memory returning. The trees, twisted and gnarled, began to materialize slowly, rising from the blackened earth, as if they had never truly left. And as they took form, I realized with a cold shiver that the cycle would start again. I was the one who would pull others onto this cursed road. I would be the figure waiting at the end, whispering in the darkness, luring them in, just as I had once been lured. It would never end, not for me, not for anyone. And as the road stretched out before me, I took one last long look at the emptiness around me. The silence was broken by the hum, that low vibration from deep within the earth, the hunger that would never be sated. And so I waited for the next car, the next soul to join me.